Thank you. So just to get a sense of the folks here, how many of you feel like you know a lot about eSports? How many people feel like they know almost nothing about eSports? How many people know a little? Okay, so that's sort of where I'm going to try and aim this. So when we talk about eSports, people overwhelmingly think of stuff like League of Legends, Counter-Strike, etc. And what's interesting is, I think most of us here at this conference get how important the phone is, right? And so there are 2 billion people plus on it, and I'm going to give some numbers, but really one of the key things for you folks to understand is that just like esports have been going longer than people think of, mobile esports have already actually been growing steadily. So it's not an if question or even a when question, it is how fast is it growing? And so that's something for sort of important to understand. So my first slide is the way fundamentally we look at esports is it's fundamentally sports and it's fundamentally competition. And one of the things to understand is that, and as we've seen with stuff like StarCraft, it takes time to build. It's 50 years for a game to become a sport. Video gaming is 50 years old. I just was at E3 and people were talking about games like Street Fighter are more than 30 years old. Now, the history of esports, it has started really early because when we talk about esports, what we're really focusing on is people competing seriously, right? And so here's a sort of a timeline that we would suggest, and I think for most of us you would think of sort of the LAN parties where people grabbed their computers, got together in a room, connected it, went through all the hassle. And that really in many ways is sort of the spiritual predecessor to sort of the hardcore esports that are going on, but the phone does so much more and makes so much of this easy that we've seen a massive, massive increase in the play just like we have in other areas. And very much sort of in that second screen phenomenon, esports on mobile dramatically appeal because I can have this while I'm doing other stuff. I can watch various channels, and there are people who put out feeds for that, and I can play the game while I'm watching Twitch and other sort of traditional channels. So I mentioned the size of the market. This may be surprising, but it's already a very substantial market. I mean, there were 120 million people who were enthusiasts. There were 235 million people in 2015. This year there's going to be almost 400. It's a very steady growth, and what's key is it's already a very established audience. What's fascinating is we're seeing it compared to sort of traditional sports. I'm sure this is familiar to people, that really sort of the younger generation of players, of viewers, have migrated heavily to this. So we see League of Legends is bigger than the NBA Finals. It's getting very, very close to the Super Bowl when we look at the biggest stuff. So this is already an absolutely established phenomenon, unsurprisingly. And again, on mobile, it's bigger than people think of. Because, largest, most popular gaming platform, none of this is surprising, continuing to grow, continuing to be more and more accessible, continuing to monetize at a higher and higher level, and everybody already has it, right? You don't have to go spend $1,500 on a PC, you don't have to spend for a console, you don't have to worry about whether your thing is 4K, it's on your phone and it works. Okay, we get this. And the key is everybody has access to it. And people who wouldn't necessarily think of themselves as esports gamers or as esports viewers or as serious competitors, what we'll see, what we certainly are seeing, is that a solid percentage of every game that we see has a competitive element. Okay, so mobile esports, basic numbers here. I'll let you absorb them, nothing surprising. 2016, mobile game revenues are bigger. Only going to further widen. Now we get into what's really interesting. So we say in eSport, you sort of know a little, you think of a bunch of kids playing StarCraft years ago, and now a bunch of sort of young people being excellent at stuff like League of Legends. But let's break that down a little further. Really what it boils down to is fair competition. And especially on mobile where the pattern has been free to play, which in many ways is sort of I pay to win, right, when I'm playing competitively because I've spent a lot in the game and I better get that awesome thing I use, better benefit me later, is directly different in an esports context because one of the most important elements is it's fair competition, right? I don't have a competitive advantage, and I think esports as a whole, we certainly in our games, and everybody goes to great lengths to avoid cheating, hacking, all kinds of things like that, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail. But that fair competition, that everybody is on a level playing field, that motivation that's very different than exists on mobile is critical to understand that. Right, that is the basis of this. It is I have to have fair competition. I have to feel like I have a perfectly equal chance. I have to be able to compete. right? I'm not advantaged, I'm not disadvantaged, it is fair. Second, organized tournaments. The analogy here again is to regular sports, where it is the tournaments, it is the league, it is the standing, it is the status of me being better, my team being better. I know how my team does, it's objective, right? And it is something where there is this head-to-head element, and that is critical because you need the tournaments to say, not only is the competition fair, but the competition matters because here is where it matters. Here is the result that determines whether I won. And then third, spectatorship. And there's a further element within that, which is narrative. Because with sports as a whole, the reason it's interesting as a business, the reason there are professional leagues, is because there are people who can appreciate what they're watching, who engage with what they're watching, and who understand what they're looking at. And this is a very important element because League of Legends, how many people here feel like they know how to play League of Legends at a decent level? I don't. How many people here feel like they can watch soccer and have a good understanding of what they're seeing, right? How many people here understand solitaire, right? This is a meaningful thing, and yet the League of Legends audience is huge, is passionate, and has this great loop where I watch, it gets me more involved in my game, I play my game, it gives me more insight, so that when I watch it's more and more appealing, and there's this great loop. Okay? So, competition. I've been going into that. One of the things, for example, that we do a lot of work around making sure that we control for stuff like device. We do it sort of in a modified ELO, and good competition. There are startups that do nothing but focus on how to create fair and good matchups. I can tell you a meaningful percentage of my company works doing data just so that we can make sure you have a fair match, and just so that you're not cheating, so that we see nothing weird in your play patterns. We've even, for some of our real money winners, sent somebody out and made them play in front of our investigator to make sure that they can replicate scores. That's not a joke, and this is on a mobile site that probably you've heard of us this year. You may not have heard of us before, but it's this key element of it is a fair competition, and it's important. And it's actually, this is something that takes a shocking amount of work in the online mobile environment, where we have to care about sort of distributed devices. Tournaments, I feel like I've talked about it. We know ourselves when we started to add bracket-style tournaments, we saw retention and monetization increase dramatically. People liked it. This is obvious in many things, in many areas. It is the competition that is key. It is that sort of laddered element of, I have beaten this group of people, I can see myself getting better, I watch the world championships of whatever, I know that this applies. And then the spectatorship. Now it's interesting on mobile. One of the things that Skills didn't do this at first, and this is sort of our own experience, and for you to sort of, I think, capture is, we've invested a lot of time in the last year and a half really focusing on sort of providing an experience that people can stream. And how many of you watch Twitch at least once a week? YouTube game streams? I mean, I will tell you, this is something that for me in the last 9 years of games, I've been in the game industry for 17 years, it was striking how much more prevalent this has become. So to the extent that you're working with your staff, my experience is that people who are 28 and younger, this is half of what they consume. Many of them grew up watching Minecraft, StarCraft, whatever the games are changing. But this spectatorship, they're used to this distributed bottoms-up model with a million different streamers, probably literally, putting out content on 50 different games that people then find, absorb, and get more and more involved in. I mean, you guys have probably heard of the Minecraft. There's a startup that's doing in theaters in North America. Competitive Minecraft league, which I find interesting. But the key is that spectator element, because I'm there to watch, I'm there to play, but I'm there to also participate, feel like I'm getting better, feel like I'm seeing who's impressive, and it can be digested in this very dispersed model, because we can't assume on mobile that we will have the Dota competition with the very best caster who knows the intricacies of the game. So we have to actually, when we as an industry think about mobile, have to think about how do we do this in a distributed manner. One of our solutions has been to build tools that basically help the streamer call out what's important. But it's the spectatorship and it's the narrative of the match. One of the things we talk about is even the score. We spend a lot of energy on games that are on our platform adjusting scoring so that I can look at the score and have a sense of what happened in the match. And when I see other people play, what can I possibly do so that the person watching knows that person is better and here's why. Okay, so this is how we think of the infrastructure, and you see it sort of broken into three big pieces. In the player matching, you have to make sure that the matching itself is fair. And in Skills' case, we do both virtual currency and real money prizing, so people can pay either to enter a tournament and then the winners get it. Real money introduces lots of complexities, as you can imagine. If anyone has ever had to deal with getting deep into payments, you can appreciate the complexities of that. I think it's one of the advantages we've had, and the guys who founded Skills actually had a payment company before that. And that stuff's very hard. The nice thing about doing all the payment stuff is it actually is good for anti-cheating. And anti-cheating is important because if people feel, you guys have probably seen some of the scandals that have sort of made it to more broad news, where there have been questions about fairness and about cheating. And this is central to an experience that people just have to know that it's fair and that the company and that the game and that everybody involved is doing everything they can to preserve that integrity. Which sounds funny when you think about people playing bowling competitively on the phone, but we know this matters. When we talk to our users, and I hear this sort of generally from sort of PC eSports people, they are obsessed with fairness, and it's hard. That's probably the hardest thing to do. The second level is esports tournaments. To the extent that people do real-world prizing, you have to comply with local rules. We, for example, indemnify and help people understand that. But it's making sure you're following that, making sure that you understand what's going on, and really making sure that it's done in a way that can't be hacked. Okay, the third thing is, talked a little bit about the streamer enablement. To give you guys an idea, one of the things that we felt was so important, we've devoted a lot of resources to it, is we have the ability to capture the gameplay for everything, and we do it in a way that we don't have to embed in the code. One of the things we do is we spend a significant amount of energy to tag that with metadata so that we can present to the person who's presenting the game, to the streamer, information automatically in a way that they can actually incorporate in sort of the course of talking to their viewers for 6 hours. Because these people are probably streaming on average 6 hours a day, and we want to give them interesting little nuggets. We sort of jokingly internally call it eSports Center, and the idea is to give them nuggets, to tell them why this match is interesting. What's the biggest upset? Hey, X just got their best score ever, because this is stuff that to the streamer economy matters hugely, and it's something that to building that spectatorship. We talk a lot about sort of in the NBA, there are only 450 people in the NBA, and there are 45 million people in the US that play basketball. It is that reinforcing loop, and it's again, I know I'm good because I've made that shot. I know that person is good because I have enough underlying information about basketball to appreciate it. And that's something that we feel is critical when you think about how to do mobile esports, is understanding that there's this sort of entertainment merger with gameplay. And it's that combination that, as sort of I came to it, understanding how to present that in a way that's intuitive, in a way that's natural, in a way that doesn't sort of have to be front and center. Because I don't know if anyone's ever seen the NFL broadcasts in England. They do a lot of very remedial explanation to sort of, because they have to assume that people don't understand what they're doing. So to the extent that you can minimize that and help people understand why what they're looking at is interesting or cool, you will be successful. Okay. Why do you care? This is great, this sounds super cool. What does it actually matter to your users? Here's the kind of stuff that we actually see in hardcore numbers on games on our platform, right? And for those of us who've done games for a long time, I think most of us would say that if you could have one number that's amazing, it's retention, right? And I can't share some of the numbers, but I was shocked at the 4-year survival rate from the earliest Skills users, and seeing that go up as the game quality's improved on our platform. These are numbers that, this is compared to the games before implementing this. And my own opinion is that, call it 20% of your game, unless it's specifically competition only, 20% of everybody's game and everybody's audience will happily play each other competitively. And a meaningful percentage of that audience, if you offer real-world prizing, will participate in that. Everywhere, we see this across stuff like Solitaire, Bridge, right? These games that you wouldn't think of monetizing that way. 2 Dominoes games are tearing it up on our system right now. So we're seeing this behavior. Just like people will play darts at a bar, they will play pool at a bar. These are things that people understand. They will do this on their phones. They will do this in the mobile environment. They will do this in a tablet if presented in that sort of casual way. And some of them get very excited about it and start getting very competitive. By the way, a thing to note here is these are numbers for the system as a whole. So the great majority of the players we see on our system, although I mentioned we offer cash prizing, play virtually. So this is a behavioral pattern, not just a cash pattern. Okay, so the key takeaways. Number one, hopefully to this audience, is very, very straightforward. The future of esports is mobile. The future of everything in games is mobile, right? I mean, you could argue AR and VR, they're very interesting. I see them actually in many ways as as derivative of mobile, because I have my phone with me all the time. right? The AR stuff to me is actually more promising because I can experience it as I go. I certainly myself don't work directly in VR, although skills is having conversations. I was much more bullish when I put on the Google Daydream than when I put on my Vive. My Vive's amazing, but that's a very limited, very controlled, very necessarily sort of experience in a bubble. It's sort of an appointment thing, whereas when I put on the Daydream, I could imagine using that in sort of idle moments, in that hour a day of my life where I happen to have my phone, there's something cool, I think of it. And this is really our fundamental thesis, because not everybody's going to spend 6 hours a day in front of their computer playing eSports, but that audience is passionate about it, and what we think, and what we observe, is they'll do both. So even in stuff, we had the guy who was the third best, I think he's the third most populous streamer, a guy named Doublelift, who went back to play League of Legends. This is all stuff that is perhaps a foreign language, but it's important to understand. We ran a charity tournament with that guy, and it was shocking to see the engagement on that. And we were seeing it ourselves from an audience that we thought would have been very hardcore, and they were playing a puzzle game in our system. And it was fascinating because it was mobile, because it was a second screen experience, because it was something that streamers can just incorporate. It works naturally. And for people, everybody knows this. I mean, how much of your gameplay occurs while you're waiting for me to talk at this, while you're waiting in line, while you're waiting for your car to show up? There's a half an hour to an hour a day that you fill with entertainment that you didn't before, because you can. And even the eSports, that applies. For a mobile game to be considered an eSport, it needs good competition, fun and fair tournaments, and streamability. What that really means, the second point here is it has to be fair, and you have to care, and it has to make sure that somebody can come in and win by skill. Right? This is not something where somebody can buy their way to have a better advantage. They shouldn't be on a better phone or have a better connection. To the extent that this is interesting for you in your particular situation, it has to be fair. That is the bedrock. Streamability is important because the third element, and the one that it took me a while to really understand, is how do I have the narrative? How do I keep the spectators interested? How do I give context to what the person is looking at? Because that's the piece that makes it fun. And just to give you guys an idea, Candy Crush level videos get millions of views. Right? I mean, it would be shocking if you go look at the kind of things that get millions of views that you would never think of it. It's critical, and that's because in almost all those cases, someone's either telling you why what you're looking at is material, like League of Legends, or it's obvious from its face, because for the 250 million people that have played Candy Crush, they can appreciate if somebody does a great job on that level. And I suspect that many of those people are trying to solve that particular level, but they're nonetheless watching it and getting it. And that's something that really, if you walk away, the two words that I wish, if you don't already know them, are competition and narrative. Right? Burn those into your brain, because that is the critical stuff that's not obvious coming from the rest of the game world. Okay. With that, I wanted to make sure I left a couple minutes for questions. I have 3 or 4 minutes. Feel free to ask whatever you would like.
Tell us about Twitch. What do you think about Twitch?
I think it's profound. I think it's turned out to be a good buy at $1 billion for Amazon. I think they've gotten access. It's like Instagram when Facebook bought it. This is an audience that who here thought Twitch was worth $1 billion 4 years ago? Not me, right? I was shocked. And I think that they got a total bargain from it now, because again, I'm seeing as people come into the office, the younger our younger hires, people fresh out of school, they watch hours a day of it. And what's interesting, I don't know if anyone looks at sort of what's popular on Twitch, their IRL streams are climbing quite high, which is people doing stuff like knitting. So it's a much more profound media change. I mean, I know the media companies have woken up to it, so I think that Twitch has the early mover advantage. Now, what's not clear to me, the thing I personally, if I'm Twitch, I'm thinking about very, very hard is, how do I make a compelling experience on this little screen, right? How do I make a compelling experience second screen on my second screen? Because how am I going to digest it in the 4, 5, 10-minute bites that people view it? Because streaming, weirdly, our internal image of it is, it's almost like running an old radio broadcast. You've got 6 hours of air every day that you better fill, or your streamers won't, or your audience won't stick with you. So we think one of our advantages right now, for example, for us, is that it gives streamers something to do. Because these people have to be on 30 to 40 hours a week to get serious about being able to stream. So if I'm Twitch, this is the burning question. How do I have an experience that's digestible, that's interesting, that's authentic, that still doesn't make me just watch my phone for an hour, which I probably won't do. So hopefully that's helpful. Another question? Yes?
What are the
What are the ranges of prizes that you're seeing in your system in terms of types of games, like really complex esports or even some of the simpler puzzle games? What types of, what ranges do you see?
Types of ranges in terms of what the prizes are, in terms of the...
Prize money?
Well, it's interesting because ours are sort of tournament funded, right? So we'll see if I actually turned my phone off so I wouldn't inadvertently get beeped during this conversation. I think our leaderboard, just to give you an example, for the cash tournaments, I think we run like a $10,000 leaderboard in our solitaire game every couple days on solitaire. And what's fascinating, and this is the thing that I think is profound, one of the reasons that skills was interesting to me personally is I like seeing a big audience where people don't know how to use it yet. I was at Zynga very early, and that was one of the insights, is a lot of people are on Facebook with not enough to do. It worked out very well, as it turns out. But I think the key here is that what we're seeing, to your point about prizes, to me the interesting point about that is it seems to be who participates in the competition fits with the game's demographic. So in solitaire, it's a primarily female game, it's older. But the percentage of people that like to play competitively is actually surprisingly pretty flat. Now that's typically the games we focused on are games that are in many cases single player, but it's not like 4% of solitaire wants to play it and 30% of dominoes wants to play it. It's that constant 20%, 70% of the people we've surveyed said they would play competitively. We see 40 or 50% involved in that. I mean, these are not exact numbers, but to give you a sense of it. But what's fascinating is it is a pretty constant percentage of the audience of whatever game it is, of whatever genre it is, rather than the same people playing across multiple games. It's not everybody being 19 who's playing it, or everybody being a social casino player who only plays these games. It is a very common percentage of that audience who likes to play competitively. And I think with Twitch, my sense is that the games that ultimately work best there, just to tie back to that earlier point, are overwhelmingly with that emergent gameplay of player versus player, rather than just experiencing a narrative, no matter how great it is. Because I love Breath of the Wild. I've put 100 hours into it. Maybe I'll spend another 30 hours on it. League of Legends, I just was reading an article about a guy who'd played Dota for 3,000 hours in the last 6 years. Okay, I'm at time.
I'm going to, Bill will be around, so can we give a round of applause, please? That's fantastic. Okay. Very smart guy. We're going to have a panel about all these issues later as well, so there'll be more opportunities in about half an hour to ask direct questions. Obviously, Bill will be around now. So.
Yeah, I'll stay back there if anyone wants to chat. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much indeed. So cool. That's what.